Welcome to the My Best Divorce Basics series. My name is Christopher Bruce. I'm a divorce lawyer in South Florida, and today's lesson is all about how to hire and work with your divorce lawyer. The objective for what we're going to learn is how to find the best divorce lawyer for you and how to efficiently work with the lawyer to obtain your desired results in your case. A lot of people who go through divorce don't have a great deal of experience working with lawyers, which is probably a good thing. So this lesson is really for those people. It's all about how to go about finding the right attorney, learning how a divorce lawyer works in terms of charging, and whether you really even need an attorney for the process. So I cover all of that fairly succinctly here. This is a complete section in the book I wrote called The Best Divorce. So if you want a little bit more detail, I laid it out in granular detail in that book. So how will a lawyer help things? Everybody says lawyers make things worse. Well, not everybody. I certainly don't, but I'm an attorney, so go figure. For your divorce, what the lawyer is going to do is help you initially understand whether what you want in a divorce settlement is realistic and ever could happen based on the local laws and your particular judge. Family law, divorce law often is set by a state statute, but the judges have some discretion in how they enforce those statutes. And if you have a really good attorney who's familiar with the local judiciary, they're going to be able to tell you probably what's going to happen within a relative degree of certainty given the judge assigned to your case. The biggest thing an attorney is going to do is help you develop and refine a strategy for resolving your case on fair terms as soon as possible. Also, what the lawyer is going to do is handle the legal process and the hard conversations and negotiations that are going to be part of your divorce with a clear head and without emotion or clouded judgment. Face it, the unraveling of your marriage, especially a long-term marriage, is not an easy thing to do, and when you're going through that process, it's optimal to have somebody who has a clear head, is not tied up emotionally in your situation, somebody that has independent judgment that can tell you what you should be doing, when you should be doing it, and how you should be doing it. I say to some of my clients when they hire me that ultimately what I do is drive the vehicle that gets them through their divorce and onto the life that they want after the divorce. Once they hire me, it's off their shoulders and I handle everything with their input. It's almost like having a taxi driver. You tell them where you want to go and the driver gets you there. Similar with a divorce lawyer, at least that's how it's supposed to work in my view as a divorce lawyer. So do you really need an attorney for your divorce? I always chuckle when I'm asked this question because maybe I'm a little bit biased as a divorce lawyer as to whether somebody really needs a divorce lawyer. But the fact is, in Florida where I practice, in almost everywhere else, probably everywhere else, you do not have to have an attorney to get divorced. In Florida, our Supreme Court has come up with a set of forms that are very detailed. They have instructions, and they are set up to allow people to get divorced without attorneys, and a lot of people do. If you want to see those forms, just as an example, Google Florida Supreme Court approved family law forms, and you'll see that information. In many states and other jurisdictions have similar resources. But the reason most divorces happen without both people having an attorney is most divorces are not complex in nature. If what I tell people is you should have a lawyer for your divorce if there is a dispute over children or spousal support, if you're afraid of your spouse, or if the marital net worth, meaning what you have minus what you own, or what you have minus what you owe, assets minus liabilities, is greater than $150,000. If your net worth in the marriage is over $150,000, it's probably worth it to pay an attorney. And I would say having an attorney, in my view, is mandatory if you're dealing with any ongoing financial obligation or child custody issues that you're not completely comfortable with. So you don't have to have an attorney. If your case is disputed and is going towards a trial, you probably should have an attorney. In Palm Beach County, where most of my practice is, our judges are great. They're very patient, but a few of them have special reputations for not really enjoying doing trials when one person doesn't have a lawyer. In some cases, it has to happen, but you can afford an attorney and your case is being contested, you should have one. And what I tell people is, do you really want to risk a major screw up with permanent implications to save, the $5,000 to $15,000 that most lawyers are going to cost? Most of the time, it's just not worth it if there's any complexity to your situation. So how much do lawyers cost? Well, down where I am in South Florida, which is one of the more expensive areas in the country, a lot of the lawyers I see charge between $200 an hour to $600 an hour. Many of them fall in between. A great deal of them aggregate around the $300 an hour price range. In my practice, I'm a little bit higher than that, but I've been doing it a while, and all I do is the divorce work. Most of the time, you're going to end up paying in the beginning what's called a retainer to the lawyer, a certain amount of money to hire the lawyer, and usually that's going to be between $5,000 to $15,000 unless your case is incredibly complex or has a lot of things happening early on in the case. That's what most of the lawyers are going to require up front. A lot of people ask, hey, what does it cost to handle my case and get it settled? I tell people, in the context of a more complicated divorce, one where there's a business and spousal support, maybe children that have to be dealt with, usually if everything goes as planned, everybody cooperates, there aren't any emergency type issues. If there was a business and the case is settled when they usually are, it's going to be between $7,500 to $15,000 in legal fees. That's assuming the divorce case is filed, the records are gathered quickly, and there's a mediation early on in the case before much else happens to where the case is settled. So that's typically the costs when there is litigation that proceeds to a trial. The costs can be substantially higher, and it really just comes down to what is in dispute. How does the other lawyer act? Are they an aggressive attorney that litigates everything and fights everything, even things that should be agreed on, or do they make reasonable concessions where they should? All of that goes into the total cost. One thing I tell people is, don't rule out fixed fee options with their lawyer. Not a lot of attorneys charge on a fixed price basis. I've started doing it in my practice just because I like the certainty that comes with knowing what my client is going to pay me, and I also like working with the client when they don't feel like every time they pick up the phone they're being charged to speak to me. It's kind of a mutually beneficial arrangement. The client knows what they're paying and what legal services they're getting for that payment, and the attorney knows what they're being paid and doesn't have to worry about chasing somebody to pay their bill. With fixed price divorce arrangements, at least with my firm, you pay a price up front, and that's the price you pay if your case is resolved within the parameters laid out in the agreement. I will tell you that a fixed price, at least with my firm, is not a cheap price, but the price allows you certainty so that you know what you're going to pay for certain aspects of your divorce case, and allows you to better budget the costs. Most of the time with my firm, the fixed price is going to be for certain stages of the case. In other words, there'll be a certain fee you will pay in the beginning, and that will cover what I expect will need to happen to resolve your case, usually at an early mediation. And then there are different prices after that cover what comes next in the case, depending on what has to happen. The fixed price does not cover everything and has certain limitations with it, but generally a lot of the clients that have done it so far like the certainty that comes with it, and my firm does as well. Not a lot of lawyers do the fixed price arrangements, but if you can find one that does and the attorney knows what they're doing, you can do it. A lot of those same attorneys will charge by the hour. I charge by the hour as well, but something worth looking into. So, if you don't know a great deal of attorneys, how do you find a qualified divorce lawyer to interview? There's a few different ways to do this. One is asking around. Ask people who are likely to know who the reputable divorce lawyers are in your area. Usually these are other lawyers, accountants, marriage therapists, members of your church or synagogue are likely to know who the good divorce lawyers are in your area, especially if you know an attorney that practices law at a large law firm or an estate planning law firm. People that have clients that, these are attorneys that have clients who will pay for good advice and are not price sensitive. Those attorneys are going to know who the best people are in your area because their clients demand the best, and they're not going to recommend people who could potentially mess up their client's situation. So those are the best sources to ask if you're trying to keep your divorce a little bit quiet, without people knowing that you're asking around for divorce lawyers and you don't know any attorneys yourself. You can call to get names. One thing I would do is consider looking up some of the estate planning attorneys in your area and asking somebody in their office who they refer their divorce cases to. If you call 5 or 10 estate planning attorneys, you'll probably very quickly get a short list of who the better people are in your area. You can also look to the internet to find divorce lawyers in your area, but just keep in mind that there is not always a correlation between the attorneys who pay the most for internet advertising and the divorce lawyers who are the most skilled. So what I recommend you do is find 2 or 3 attorneys who come most recommended and arrange for a meeting, sometimes called a consultation, with that lawyer. That's going to be a meeting. Usually it's going to be around an hour or so, sometimes a little bit longer. And it's going to be usually at the lawyer's office, sometimes over the phone if you prefer. And in most cases, you're going to pay for that meeting or consultation. A lot of the attorneys who just do family law, divorce law all of the time and have a good reputation, the good attorneys in most instances charge for this consultation, at least in the South Florida area. Some attorneys have free consultations, which may be useful, but in most cases, the attorneys who are busy doing the divorce work and have a practice that deals with the more complicated divorce work are going to charge for the initial meeting. That's just how it goes. Usually it's the lawyer's hourly rate. You pay a certain fee for the meeting. It's not like you're on a timer, but there'll be a certain fee in most cases. So you should pick 2 or 3 of the attorneys that come most recommended and schedule an attorney interview. And when it comes to the interview, what I'd recommend is being as organized as possible and having an agenda for the attorney interview before you get there. In the book, The Best Divorce, that I wrote, there's a section on exactly how I'd recommend the interview going with the lawyer. Basically, what I'd recommend is right when you start, tell the lawyer the basic facts of your background and what you're looking for in a divorce settlement. You're going to have to tell them, explain the nature of the assets and liabilities, some of the background on what you and your spouse do. If there's children, you're going to need to tell them the details. Often the lawyer's going to have some questions, but what I'd recommend is you give that background and then tell the lawyer in big picture terms what you want in a settlement and ask them if they think that's appropriate. Get their feedback. Ask them how they would go about trying to get that settlement for you. And all of those open items, open questions that you have that you've been keeping track of, try to get the lawyer to answer those questions. And probably the most important thing is to ask the lawyer what their strategy would be for resolving your case on fair terms as soon as possible and see what they have to say. And you're going to want to do this with 2 or 3 attorneys so that you can not only figure out which lawyer you feel most comfortable with, but you're going to see which lawyer is most adept at telling you how your case should be resolved, what's going to happen, when it's going to happen. If the lawyer is not able to tell you this in an initial meeting, it might be a sign that the attorney is not going to be able to tell you their strategy after you hire them, which might be a sign that the lawyer is one of the attorneys out there that really just doesn't have strategies. So that's all stuff to be aware of. As part of the interview, you should ask the attorney about their experience. How often do they handle family law cases, divorce cases? How do they charge for what they do? What do they think the total costs will be if your case is settled at a certain juncture? And ask all of those questions and keep track of what each attorney says. If the attorney consents, I'd recommend recording the interview so that you can play it back later as you try to pick which lawyer you want to hire. When it comes to choosing attorneys, how do you do it? Well, I'd recommend you evaluate a few different criteria. First, did the lawyer listen and answer your questions, or did they try to impress you with their knowledge? Usually the lawyer that listens to you in the initial meeting is going to be the lawyer that understands what's important to you when you hire them. There's plenty of outstanding divorce lawyers who are very humble, and they're not going to tell you how great they are. They're more interested in getting you the result that you're interested in, and then they know that to do that, they have to listen. So keep track of that. Did you personally get along with the lawyer? Are they somebody you're comfortable with? You don't need to hire a lawyer who's your friend. Your lawyer is not your friend. Your lawyer is a tool to get a stage in your life over with as soon as possible, but it always helps if you mesh with that attorney's personality. If you're intimidated by the attorney and afraid to talk to them, it might not be the most productive relationship. Another criteria should be, what is the lawyer's experience dealing with divorce cases? I know some exceptional attorneys who have very wide practice areas. One day they'll do a divorce, and they'll do a commercial business dispute, and the next day they'll do a will. But I'll just tell you that it's probably the best, if you live in an area that has a lot of attorneys, to work with an attorney who just does divorce all of the time. If that's the case, then their office is going to be staffed with people who just do divorce all of the time. They're going to have better relationships with the local judges. It's probably a safer way to go. Not to say that there isn't a general practitioner that could do a great job with your divorce, but if you have a complex situation, it's just not worth the risk. I'd equate it to, would you have your general internist perform open heart surgery? Probably not. Of course, take this for what it's worth. I'm a divorce lawyer. All I do is divorce, so I'm probably more inclined to say just hire lawyers who only do divorce than some other people, but it's worth thinking about. Also, I'd evaluate, does the lawyer have staff that can help them handle your case? And that staff can be other attorneys or paralegal staff. Oftentimes, some of the initial work in divorce cases can be done by paralegals, and the real lawyer work is minimal up to the point of a case settling. It's really more gathering information, presenting it, and the lawyer is evaluating the information to make sure it's accurate and does some negotiations. It's not full-blown trial work. So you want to have a lawyer preferably that has a good staff to help, and staff that can be there and answer the phone if the lawyer's busy with other cases or in court. There's a lot of solo practitioners, meaning attorneys who run their own office without staff. And for those people, you want to know what's their system for getting back in touch with clients when they're not available. Also, another criteria for the attorney selection is the pricing. Was a lawyer comfortable discussing the pricing? I wouldn't recommend hiring solely on the basis of price for attorneys. It's just one of those things. Sometimes the better lawyers are a little bit more expensive, but at the end of the day, it's worth it. Your case gets over with sooner, or you may end up paying a little bit more initially, but less over the long term because your case is settled and doesn't drag on. There's a lot of problems with divorces that are not over with quickly in terms of mounting costs. So it's sometimes worth it to pay a little bit more for a very good divorce attorney than to incur the expenses of a divorce that lingers on over time. But one thing I'd recommend is making sure your attorney is comfortable discussing the price and giving you a range. If they can't give you any type of a range or an idea, it might be a sign that they're not very experienced in handling your type of a case. Once you have chosen your attorney, a couple of things that you should keep in mind for having a productive relationship with your divorce lawyer, I'm going to go through now. You want to communicate up front about your goals. Make sure the attorney knows what's important to you. As you're going through the representation with the attorney, you want to make sure you're asking questions. You're not afraid to speak up. On the same token, you're probably going to want to follow your lawyer's advice. If you're ignoring everything they tell you and handling the divorce on your own, you might as well not have the attorney. If the attorney's telling you to do something a certain way, it's probably because it's the best way. I like to use fixed fee arrangements with most of my clients, but if you're paying your lawyer by the hour, you should consider how you communicate with the attorney and how you use email. Oftentimes, email is one of the more expensive ways to get answers to your questions. If you send 5 emails with 5 different questions and you want a written response, it's going to take the lawyer a lot longer, meaning you're going to pay more money to get answers to questions that you could probably cover on one phone call that addresses all of the issues. You can probably have a 10-minute phone call and have 5 questions answered that you pay a lawyer 2 hours of time to give you written responses to. So it's all on how you like to communicate with the attorney and prefer to communicate with the attorney, but consider how you batch your questions to them. Also, you should probably pay your lawyer's bill unless there's a valid reason to object. If the lawyer sends you an invoice and you don't have any dispute as to what they're doing, you're going to want to pay the lawyer's bill. Most of the attorneys out there are not especially keen on putting on a suit and going to work for people who are not paying them. So if you're not paying your lawyer, you're probably going to find yourself with an attorney that is trying to get out of your case and not represent you anymore. And once that happens, it can be harder to get other qualified attorneys to work with you in the future. Coming up in the next lesson, we're going to talk about how to refine and finalize your best divorce and best life strategies as you work with your divorce lawyer and therapist. Until then, remember that this course is not a substitute for having a competent divorce lawyer. Don't act on anything in this course until you've discussed your legal action with an attorney. This course does not create an attorney-client relationship between yourself and my law firm. I'd be happy to work with you if you have a divorce in the South Florida area. I'm available for how to have the best divorce possible. This is it for today's lesson. Thank you for listening. I hope it was helpful. Until the next time, be well. Talk to you soon.